Right then, The Female Man by Joanna Russ, published in 1975. It's considered a major work in feminist science fiction. It's also considered a major work of science fiction. It's an excellent novel. I would certainly recommend it. To begin to go through non-spoilers, I think generally non-spoilers, summation of the book, it's concerned with 4 different women who are from 4 different worlds, which I hope isn't giving too much away, and their different perspectives on what it means to be a woman in their respective worlds largely is what the novel is concerned with. In many ways, it's a series of thought experiments. One character is a stranger in a strange land, or several characters is a stranger in a strange land as the women visit the different universes. One woman is named Joanna, who's clearly the author, who lives in a 1970s America. I assume it's our 1970s America, or the 1970s America that was. If it's not, it's close enough that it doesn't matter. Another character, Janine, is from a world in which World War II never happened. The Great Depression has dragged on. It's essentially never gone away. It's very, very traditional roles for women. There doesn't seem to be any sort of women's rights movement, no feminist movement in this world. It seems to be a very static, very conservative world. It seems stuck in a lot of ways. I'll have more to say about that as we go on. Janet is in many ways, I think, the most fascinating character. She's from a world called While Away. Men have died off. She comes from a world that is, it's about 1,000, let's say 1,000 years in the future for us. Her world is like ours in some ways, but the world she's from would be a future world, a future version. It seems to be a future version of our world, a possible future version of our world. In this world, men have been killed off by a plague. Women are able to reproduce. They have a highly they have a highly agrarian society. They possess technology, impressive technology, but the society remains curiously agrarian. It's a rather fascinating bit of world building. It's in many ways makes Janet the most interesting character. It also, one thing Joanna Russ is doing in the novel, and this is very clear with the Janet character, the women in this novel get to do things that are traditionally, usually reserved for men in literature and probably, well, yes, in life as well. For example, Janet has gone out and gone on a hunt and killed a bear, and this is, I believe, is an entrance into adulthood or into maturity. That is not something that women traditionally do in stories. Traditionally, it's something that a man would do in a story, go out and perform a ceremonial hunt or go out and engage in this activity in order to pass to adulthood, in order to mature. An adventure story, effectively. Women are often not the heroines, the protagonists of adventure stories. Janet has very much been the heroine of an adventure story, as have other women in her world. And her reactions to 1970s America, for example, that she visits, yeah, they're quite interesting. It allows her to be, it shows you the potential of women, or it shows you a world in which women can be very different than they are in the world, in Joanna's world of 1970s America. And I should here perhaps say, because I think Janet makes it most clear, what is the female man? And I would have to check. I believe it comes up in Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, but if I'm getting that wrong, please feel free to correct me. And I'd like to know if I'm getting that wrong, obviously. In the book, a female man is a woman who simply does the things that one would want to do as a human being. She is a woman who is going to seek fulfillment outside of the home if she wishes. She's going to do things. She's going to take an active part in the world. She's going to participate. She's not merely going to stay within the confined roles or the roles that have been determined for women. She's going to step out of those. She's going to behave like a man. She's going to be a woman, but she'll be a man in the sense that she will do the things that a man might do. Go on adventures, leave the domestic sphere, the household, perhaps have a career, what have you. Seek knowledge, so forth. And that is in the novel the meaning of a female man, or the female man. Finally, the final character, and this is, at this point I would say this is spoilers. So you've been warned. It's an excellent novel. Go read it. Come back, please. But I would say this is rather spoilery, so I will say you've been warned. Dragons kick in, spoiler dragons, whatever, kick in after this. The fourth woman is Yael, or Jael. I'm not going to quibble with pronunciations. And Jael is from a world in which there's a literal war of the sexes. Men and women are engaged in a genocidal struggle against one another. Men and women are fighting. The rationale for this being that war is always between the haves and the have-nots. Those who have, those who do not have. And finally, that comes down to men versus women. That comes down to a battle of the sexes. When it's no longer a struggle between races, when it's no longer a struggle between classes, nations, what have you, it becomes a struggle between men and women. And Yael is very much a James Bond or Jane Bond character. She is an assassin. She is delighted by it. She is in no way, she has no doubts about what she is doing. She is determined to eliminate, as I say, engage in a genocidal war against men. In the course of the novel, she performs an assassination, which the other women, the three other women who are visiting her world, witness. And in a rather delightful section of the book as well, Jael, there is a sexual intercourse. There's a sexual encounter with a male android that she has. Yael, the women in Yael's world are able to reproduce through technology, and she has a male sex robot, a male sex toy with whom she has sex in the book. This is also witnessed by the other women. And this again, as with Janet, engaging in the adventure and hunting, this is something usually reserved for male characters, or if you older literature, well, current literature as well, men enjoy themselves with women who are often depicted. There's nothing really to the women. They're not really characters. They don't really serve any other purpose in the narrative, in the books or in the stories. Sex, right? That's all they're there for. There's no examination of these women as characters. They are sex kittens. They are sex toys, and that is all they are. Russ is turning that on its head here, rather obviously. Here, the deadly assassin, Yael, this woman, she's willing to kill men, delighted by the idea, quite happy to be a killing machine, and she is genuinely a killing machine, and she's quite happy to engage in casual sex. Is not even enough of it's not even casual sex. It's something even more casual than that. She's willing to engage in this activity, usually reserved for men in novels and stories. So there is a element. Russ is here taking tropes and changing the genders, changing the sex. Right? What men do in other books, women are doing here. Now, the ending of the novel, the ending is excellent. But before that, Yael fascinatingly proposes, she wants to establish military bases on the other worlds. In other words, in Janet's world, Janet's world doesn't have men, so perhaps we can leave that out. But in Janine's world and in Joanna's world as well, I suppose, well, yes, she wants to establish secret military outposts so that this war of the sexes, this war against men, this genocidal war against men, can be conducted in other worlds. Janine is willing. Janine is quite willing to go along with this. And then it's worth dwelling here somewhat on Janine's experience. Janine, as I said, is from a world where the Great Depression is dragged on, World War II never happens. The roles for women are very traditional roles. She's expected to get married. She's expected to want the things that will come with marriage, the material comforts, the pretty clothes. She talks a lot. She talks a lot about why is everyone so impressed with these pretty clothes? Why are the pretty clothes such a motivation? And Janine embraces. Ultimately, she struggles against it. She's resisting it, but she, in the course of the novel, does actually embrace these values, does actually embrace this idea of, I'll get married, I'll take care of the man, I'll listen to the man, I'll satisfy the man's needs, it will all be about him, I'll find happiness, fulfillment in this, everything will make sense once I do this. That is very much the attitude that she tries to adopt. Understandably, I think. Janine's world is, it's restricted. The options are restricted. Your choices are quite restricted. There are just not that many viable choices in Janine's world. Not marrying, not doing this. It's not particularly realistic in Janine's world. Now, Janine is, by the end of the novel, willing to burn it all down. She's willing to accept Yael's offer, or she's willing to assist Yael in establishing military bases in her world, in her universe, and carrying out, as I said, this war against men. One of the things I think that's interesting about, one of the most interesting things I think about Janine, in some ways she's a fascinating character, or I think her world is a fascinating character, or a fascinating subject. Janine's world, as I said, is static, it's conservative, it's not moving, it's not changing, it's stuck. It's not going anywhere. Which I think can be read as perhaps you should probably be appreciative of a movement such as a feminist movement, a movement for women's rights. That probably speaks to a dynamic society. That probably speaks to a society that is interested in change, or at least interested in having a meaningful conversation about this. Even if you don't regard the women's movements, women's rights as particularly beneficial to you individually, and I can see why men, well, and I suppose some women would take that view. I think in some ways Russ may be suggesting that that's a symptom of a good society. That's a sign of a women's movement, a feminist movement. It's a sign of a healthy society. It's a society that is at least willing to entertain these ideas, to debate them, that can seek for, or at least consider, alternatives to the way things are and better ways of doing things. Which is an interesting justification for the women's rights movement. It's an interesting justification for feminism, and suggests a benefit to it that is not readily apparent. Going back to Yael wants to establish, as I said, military bases, military outposts on other worlds to carry out this genocidal war against men. Janet refuses to be a part of this, or Janet doesn't wish to take part in it. Janet is, again, from a woman's utopia. She's from a utopia inhabited only by women, while away. They are fascinatingly rather contradictory. As I said, they have while away this women's utopia, this utopia of women. They're technologically advanced. As I said, they can reproduce without men. So they're technologically advanced, but largely agrarian. They are pacifist. There's not really an interest, there's no interest in large-scale war, large-scale conflict, but they fight duels to the death. When women, and there are only women, but when there is a conflict, between women, they are willing to engage in fights and duels to the death. This is seen as an acceptable way of settling differences, which suggests there's problems. There are problems with this world of while away. It seems contradictory to have this technology but not use it, although I can definitely see the benefits, I can definitely see the appeal of an agrarian society. The dueling is seems more insane, seems more outrageous, and frankly, to settle differences that way, it seems too much. I mean, it seems like a highly unreasonable way of settling such differences. I have trouble believing it would really be beneficial or, frankly, just a good idea. Finally, turning to Yael, well, not finally, because I have something to say about Joanna, who has the last word. But Yael, this genocidal war in which she's engaged, I have to read this as a criticism, or I have to read this as a rejection of a battle of the sexes, a war between the sexes being a viable idea. First of all, it would be incredible, just as a practical matter, it would be incredibly destructive if the women win. Good God, I mean, you would be starting a civilization on mountains and mountains of corpses, which seems a horrible way to begin a society. You're building your society literally on genocide, on these mountains of corpses. The second point, I think Yael's position seems rather ludicrous. You wait for someone to say to Yael, look, you enjoy killing men so much, you want to kill men so bad, it's not enough to kill men in your universe, you want to kill men in other universes. This seems insane. This seems excessive. So I have to think that, I have to think that this is either, perhaps it's a parody of such an extreme view, or perhaps it's mocking a sort of male point of view. Look, imagine a man saying, gosh, it would be great if we had sex robots and wipe out all the women. It seems hideous, but it seems like the kind of thing, it doesn't just seem hideous, it is hideous. It seems like the kind of thing you might expect would be the logical conclusion of certain male thinking, certain female thinking as well, and it's a horrid idea. Look, it deserves to be rejected on the basis of unpalatable conclusions. If your arguments lead you to conclude that the answer to your problems are a genocidal war, one sex against the other, that conclusion must be rejected out of hand. The cost is too high. It's mass murder. Right? You are arguing for mass murder. So I think I have to regard Yael's world as maybe a cautionary tale. Don't let it come to this. Solve problems in a different way, and perhaps just a rather satirical, perhaps a kind of Jonathan Swift, taken to its extreme, this is where you end up. This is how insane it can get if you follow this through. I mean, perhaps it's a cautionary note for feminism, for women's rights. This can be taken too far, as anything can, and this would be too far, ludicrously too far. I think it's very hard to take it seriously. As I said, the final word in the novel, not surprisingly, belongs to the author, Joanna. And of course, Joanna, the character, is a voice for Joanna Russ. And there's an absolutely, I really think, quite magnificent, quite good summation. Joanna speaks in her voice, in the author's voice, and it's a genuine, passionate, I think, embrace of the complexity of life, of the complexities of these issues, of the complexity of the world and the problems you face. A lot of looking back, a lot of what's proposed in the book seem like easy answers on all sides. Easy answers from women, easy answers from men. And human existence is very complicated, very messy. It's sort of Joanna's, which I take to be part of Joanna's message. Part of her message is that she will be delighted when this book is no longer necessary, when a feminist work of science fiction, when a work that is in many ways a polemic, a Jeremiad, an outright endorsement and argument for the women's rights movement, when that's no longer necessary, where you don't need that anymore, that's great. When this book is no longer relevant, when this book no longer makes sense to people, that's fantastic. Then the battle really has been won. Then there really is, the conflicts are over, and that can be dispensed with. So it's a rather heartening, it's a rather, yes, I think very positive, in some ways very optimistic viewpoint that Joanna takes in the end. And as I said, it very much stems from a powerful acknowledgement of the complexity of life, of the difficulty of these issues. And the world is so complicated, the world is so multi-layered, the world, again, is so complex. Apologies for using that word over and over, that a lot of the answers proposed, a lot of the ideas proposed, they're not necessarily bad ideas. They're not necessarily bad ideas at all. They're not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable to think this way. But the world is so vast, the world is so strange, the world is so complicated that it's hard to believe that these battle plans will survive contact with the enemy. These plans that you make, they're going to need to be adjusted. You should make them, you should plan for women's liberation, you should no doubt strive for that. It's an admirable goal. But you shouldn't do it in such a way that you simplify things, in such a way that you abstract from the world, that you make it black and white, that you make it simple, that you make everything very straightforward and clear. The world is just not that way. And an ideology, a movement, individuals who try to see that world that way, that's not going to work. Strive for these changes, strive to improve the world in these ways that you want to, while acknowledging the profound complexity and impossibility of ever fully achieving that. The world is just too strong. The world is just too complex. The world is just too multi-layered. Relationships among individuals are just too complicated. In summation, I would say I'll use the 5-star, which I guess is the Goodreads method. I would say 4, maybe 5 stars, 4.5, maybe 5 stars. It's an excellent novel, well worth your time. I've read it twice. I'll certainly read it again. I'd very much like to read more. This is the first novel I've read by Joanna Russ. I definitely plan to read more. She's a very good writer. A lot of the writing is experimental, challenging, which I also appreciated. It's worth taking on. So if you're interested in it, I think you'd enjoy it. I think you'll find it challenging, and I think you'll find it worthwhile. Finally, let me add, it's short. It's from a saner time when books were not doorstops, when books were not massive bricks. Brevity is the soul of wit, and the fact that it's so short, it compels the author to economize. She gets to the point. Actually, I should really emphasize that. That is one of the more charming aspects, frankly, of this novel. There's not an explanation really of how this world traveling is taking possible. There's not how this shifting among worlds is possible. There's not, why are we doing this? There's not all the kind of usual rigmarole. There's not all the kind of usual silliness of science fiction that you have to go through. You don't have to go through, oh, so you're from another world. Like, why? How did you get here? What does it mean? Like, all of that is eliminated, and it's definitely to the good. I definitely appreciate it not being there. Russ is very good at getting to the point. She's very good at making her points, and they're interesting ideas. They're challenging and done with real economy of means. Excellent book. Certainly recommended. I think you would enjoy it. So, all right, thanks for hanging out. Yeah, catch you later.